Okay. Today I'd like to talk about my new book, which is called Cancer Incorporated. My original topic of talking was about immunotherapy from the blacklist to the Nobel Prize, but that topic is incorporated into the topic of Cancer Incorporated. And I just want to mention, and I'll mention it again, that unlike any of my other books, this book it's a full-scale book. It's 250 pages, but it's being offered to the public for free in the electronic format, the PDF format, and people can get their own copy of it by going to my website, which is Moss Reports, MossReports.com. And then you'll see a notice of it, or you can do Moss Reports / Cancer Incorporated or Cancer Inc., INC. Either one will work. And I'm talking to you from Maine now. I made a valiant attempt to come down to the meeting yesterday, as Anne can tell you, and got stranded basically at Bangor Airport. So here I am. You can see my window, see how white it is out there. Anyway, I envy you all. I wish I could be there, and hopefully next year we can try again. So why did I write this book, and what is it about, Cancer Incorporated? Excuse me. Basically, I started out just to write a relatively small report on clinical trials. We have at Moss Reports, we have a series of 500-page reports, up-to-date reports on 38 most common cancer diagnoses, and we receive a lot of questions about clinical trials. So I was starting out to do a book, not a book, but just like a pamphlet-size report on the advantages and disadvantages of going into clinical trials, and what you could get from them and what pitfalls you should look out for. As I got into this topic, though, it expanded. It sort of took over. I mean, it was the oddest thing. I've written about a dozen books on cancer, but this sort of took me over. I mean, honestly, at points I felt like it was writing itself in a way. And there were moments where I really gasped in amazement at what was coming out, what I was finding out, I should say, even though I wrote the book, The Cancer Industry, in 1980. So I've had 40 years to ruminate and discuss and publicize this whole aspect, the economic aspect of the cancer industry, the cancer field. And I also wrote Questioning Chemotherapy in 1995. But things have developed to such a point that what I found in writing this book was incomprehensible compared to, what we knew 40 years ago. And I would sum it up by saying that in the past 40 years, the pharmaceutical industry, big pharma, and I'll explain what I mean by that, has basically seized every aspect of the oncology field, and in particular, the aspect that's most important to them, which is the testing and approval of new cancer drugs. And by doing this, and then working on the Congress, corrupting the U.S. Congress, basically, they were able to put through a whole scheme in which ineffective, or at least unproven drugs, many of them, are approved by FDA. And then, as you probably all know, the government, by law, which was the Medicare Modernization Act of 2003, is not allowed to negotiate down the price of the drugs. And so essentially the companies can charge whatever they want and force the hospitals and the doctors and society in general, Medicare being the biggest consumer of drugs, force them to take whatever price they set on these drugs. And the prices are beyond belief. you take, like, there's a whole slew of these new immune checkpoint inhibitor drugs and targeted drugs in general, and a typical price would be $150,000 per patient per year, let's say. And but that's not the limit, because the prices have actually been going up from a few years ago. And recently, the FDA approved a drug, or last year, let's say, FDA approved the drug Chimeria uh, for certain forms of cancer of the blood. And the price tag on that was $475,000 for one infusion. Carl June of the University of Pennsylvania, who invented Chimeria, has written that the actual production cost of Chimeria is $20,000. So $455,000 is basically the profit margin. Now, of course, it goes for different things inside the company, but that's essentially their markup. 20,000 in cost for producing this drug, $455,000 in profit. And the other drugs, even though they say that the price is 150,000, as Leonard Saltz and Peter Bach and others at Memorial Sloan Kettering have noted, that's the price of the vial of drugs that they're selling. It doesn't account for the costs of administering the drugs or the side effects of the drugs, which oftentimes require further medical care, serious medical care, including hospitalization in some cases. So, and when two drugs like that are administered, and then you have all the other attendant costs, it's not unusual to run up a bill of $1 million per patient. And none of that would be happening in the way that it's happening if they hadn't pushed through this pernicious bill, this so-called Medicare Modernization Act, at 3 a.m, a vote, a sort of a surprise vote at 3 a.m, passed by one vote in the Senate, and that was that. And we've lived with this now for 17 years, and who knows when, if ever, it's going to end. But it's been the biggest bonanza imaginable. Now, if these drugs truly cured cancer, you have to moderate your criticism of them. But the truth of the matter is that when you look at the big picture, and I certainly will try to do that, and I'm not going to be one-sided in my presentation or my discussion, but looking at the big picture, for most of the drugs that are approved, and there are exceptions, the average increase in survival for advanced stage 4 cancer, which is mostly what we're talking about right now, is really minuscule. There was a study in the Lancet Oncology, I believe. It showed that there was actually a survival benefit on average of 3.4 months. And you don't have to take my word for it. James Allison, who won the Nobel Prize last year, in his Nobel Prize 2018 Nobel Prize lecture, at the end of the lecture, he refers to what we're used to seeing in cancer drugs, and he says if you move the marker or the arrow over by 3 months, three or 4 months, you are basically, that's what you're looking at. So it isn't just my subjective evaluation of these drugs. There are studies that show, in fact, that's typically what the survival advantage is. And these are the very successful drugs. Now, the one big exception to this is immunotherapy for certain kinds of cancer. It's a huge topic. Basically, in the clinical trials of combined immunotherapy, that's to say, two drugs like Yervoy and Opdivo, or Yervoy and Keytruda, you can achieve much longer and more robust responses in people with melanoma and to a certain degree in lung cancer and a few other cancers as well. And this is tremendously important. In the best of these studies, 63% of people with stage 4 melanoma had advanced, survival. And I believe that in some cases this could constitute a cure. And that's something that we really haven't seen too often before, certainly in terms of anything coming out of the pharmaceutical industry. So I think we have to, acknowledge this, admit this, and be very happy about it. But even though I think that this is on the right track in terms of immunotherapy, the mobilization of the immune system to fight cancer, there are some important caveats to this. One of them is, of course, I mentioned about the price. Pricing drugs at that level, even if they do negotiate the price down from the peak, which have to pay the highest prices in the world for these drugs, but even at the lower prices, you probably are leaving out about 90 to 95% of the world population. This was studied in Latin America, and they found that in Chile,